All right, it's JPEG to Raw, show number 158. It's December 1st, and December 1st means it's the kickoff of our Best of the Year photo contest. Be looking for more details on that. We'll have something on our Facebook page, our Facebook group, our website, and on Google+. But what a great time of year to bring back Don Com. I'm going to use a short name because I always mess up his actual name. Don Com, the Snowflake guy, or what is your title there? I just made up the Snowflake guy.
Well, I mean, I've been called worse. I'll say that. I don't mind that at all. I mean, this time of the year, I get labeled as sort of like the Snowflake guy, or the photographer of ice, or whatever it happens to be. But it's funny because this time of the year is by far the busiest time for me as a photographer, when a lot of other people are kind of hanging up their hat a little bit and kind of looking outside and thinking, well, the weather doesn't really cooperate with the kind of stuff that I do, or the wedding season is over, or all of this kind of thing. So it's funny that I ramp up now, and it's busier than ever.
Yeah, because don't you kick something off in December? Every year?
Starting today,
yes.
I started my Snowflake a Day project. And so this is, it just about killed me last year. Hopefully I've got a bit more, energy this year. But every day, for 100 days straight, starting December 1st, I post a snowflake photograph online. And that's no small task, because each one takes me between 4 and 5 hours or so to edit. And so it becomes, with posting it and the interaction about it and all that, pretty much full-time work, just posting and maintaining that project.
And if you haven't seen Don's snowflakes, it's not just a glob of ice, or what you would see falling from the sky. And you live in Canada, by the way, so it's talking about people, fair weather photographers, putting away their cameras because winter's setting in. You really live where you're going to see some cold weather and some snow. But
actually, it's funny though, because this year we've got the El Nino effect coming through, and it's affecting us as well. So we've got unseasonably warm weather. I haven't had a chance to photograph any snowflakes yet, but thankfully I have a treasure chest of hundreds that I haven't edited from previous years, because it takes the editing process so long to go through. I always shoot more than I can deal with. So that helps me in moments like this.
Yeah, I want to show one image so people understand when we talk about a snowflake photo that, when I think of snowflakes, the first thought is what I see falling from the sky. And then you kind of think, okay, then there's the ones you see like on TV maybe that have some detail to it. But the ones you do, and I'm showing one of them here, the ones you do are extreme detail. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous. And you say, you hear that every snowflake is different. Whoops, I didn't mean for that to continue on. Let's pause that. Every snowflake is different. You can see that in the images Don does, that every one of the snowflakes are different. They might follow several different basic styles of look, but they're all different, and the detail in these is just amazing. And what we're showing here, of course, is a scaled down version that we can stream. On his site, he's got a lot of images that have more detail. And then you have the one that let's see if I can find it here. This one here, this poster that you've launched, right?
Yes, so this, and I have a copy of it here as well.
Let me bring you back.
And so this is officially launched today. This is roughly about 400 or so snowflakes. Good and this represents 2,500 hours of work across about 5 years to produce all of these snowflakes. Now, the trick here is they're not just placed randomly. I mean, they're placed in an aesthetic placement, but they are all sized in relative size to one another, which means every single one of these snowflakes had to be measured in order for me to scale them appropriately to have them placed this way. So the trick with that is I need to know a couple of pieces of information. I need to know the magnification factor that the lens is set to, and I need to know the physical size of the sensor and the number of pixels running across the sensor horizontally. With those three factors, it's algebra, and so I can figure out the number of pixels per millimeter. The problem with that is, in this particular case, Mike, maybe you could bring the image back up. My arm's getting a little sore here.
No problem.
The trouble with that is that I have to kind of pull that magnification factor value out of the images as I'm shooting them, and that's not a standard. That's not a standard number that gets stored in EXIF data that carries around every image as you go. It is stored, but it's in a special area of the data called maker notes. And maker notes will exist in the raw files or the unprocessed JPEGs, but they get stripped out whenever the image is edited as it runs through Adobe or any Photoshop or Lightroom, anything like that. And I'm sure other software does the same thing. So if I want to get this specific value, this magnification factor that is so important for this project, I have to then go re-reference all of the original raw files and pull that value out of them using special software. I use EXIF Tool from Phil Harvey. Great guy, wonderful little tool, can generate a text file that has every little bit of secret information inside that file for you to explore. And one of those things is the magnification factor. Only when you're using the special lens that I use, by the way, the Canon MPE 65mm lens, which has a magnification ring rather than a focus ring or a zoom ring. And so it stores that information in its data.
Can I sidetrack you for 1 second?
Oh, okay, sure. This conversation, this whole thing is going to be sidetracked, by the way.
Yeah. The EXIF tools that you just mentioned, and it has the magnification factor that's in there. When you let's say you're a Lightroom user or Adobe Camera Raw user, and you see all Photoshop user, you see some of the EXIF data that is there. Any other cool things that you can pull out from using that EXIF tool that you wouldn't see in those kind of things?
Oh, of course. There's tons of stuff. A lot of it's specific to the individual camera itself, like what picture style it happened to be set on, what flash mode it happened to be configured with, and a lot of sort of deep details with that, like whether rear curtain sync was applied on the flash. All of that stuff is stored in the file. It's recorded in every image that you may take. If you're using a GPS, it's not only going to record, at least on my camera, the exact coordinates, but it'll tell you every single GPS satellite it had connection to at the time. Wow. It'll tell you the compass direction that the camera was pointed in.
Oh, that sounds cool.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of hidden information that could be very useful. 'Cause imagine this. If you could have the compass information, and you can also pull out the focus distance. So based on where the lens was focused to, you could figure out the distance away from you where the subject was.
Right.
With your compass distance and your known physical location and the distance that the lens was focused to, you could also calculate the exact position of your subject, not necessarily just the camera. So yeah, there's tons of really cool stuff that you could dive into that people are completely unaware of that's hiding within that EXIF data. If you edit the image with Lightroom or Camera Raw, all of the slider positions are also stored within the EXIF data of the file that is pulled out using EXIF Tool and other similar tools as well. So if you want to try to recreate the exact style that somebody has created with an image, there are ways to help you along that path.
Okay. Well, we'll put that in the show notes and with that link, because I'm going to go get that. I want to see what other cool things are in there.
It's already in there.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tim. Thanks. All right, now back to your image. These snowflakes that you have there, are these ones that I imagine most of these are ones you've edited in the past that
True,
you're using here. So what I want to know is, because it sounds like, I know each one of these individually took lots of work. And you add all that to put in there. But what amount of, and you may not know this, but just maybe a wild guess, how much time did you put into just making the poster with the images you already had? It sounds like you had to spend a lot of time with all the details you just told us just to making this poster.
Yeah, it's in the hundreds of hours for sure. Yeah. I don't have an actual number, but probably between 200 and 300 hours. And that's, placing them and then replacing them to create an interesting feel to it. Like the one in the very center of the poster, it's not enlarged for artistic effect. It is the same size, or it is in relative size to all of the others. That's
amazing when you look at the tiny ones right next to it.
Yeah, the biggest ones are around 11 millimeters, just over a centimeter or so in diameter. Like that one in the center is 11 millimeters. And the smallest ones might measure 0.2 millimeters or so.
Wow.
And so, I mean, these are insignificant specks to us. I mean, they matter nothing to us as people living in this world. Even if we wanted to look at them and see the detail, it would be impossible for us to do that. So it's funny because this image, I wanted to retain as much detail as I could when I was working on it, right? So that if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, you know what, I want a 60 by 90 copy of that, or, you know, even bigger, I could probably make it like 80 by 120. I could do an 80 by 120 print at about 300 DPI. So you could nose up to it and still see detail at that size, which means the image is 12 gigapixels. And when it's running through my computer, when I'm actually working on it in Photoshop, Photoshop is actively using around 100 gigabytes of RAM as it's trying to churn out some of the changes that I'm doing and realigning and working on this. So, yeah, that was it took a lot of time and a lot of computer horsepower to produce this. And you know, it's funny because this is a culmination of a project that I've been working on for many years, about half a decade. And it's something unique that hasn't been done before. There's very few things in photography that haven't been done before that we can explore in a new and interesting way. And right. You often have to push into new extremes in order to do unique things because all the everyday stuff has been already done a million times. Yeah. So I'm glad, at least in some way, I'm able to offer something unique to the photographic community at large.
Unique is an understatement.
Yeah. No, I don't see anybody else doing this level of detail. Yeah. This is amazing.
And so we should say that this is for sale.
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. Where can somebody go to buy this?
You can go to skycrystals.ca/poster if you want to go directly to the print. And it will be shipping as a poster print that I'm going to be doing on a very high quality offset print. That will be shipping in January. But I also have available artist proofs that I print on the printer that's behind me in my office. And those have a much higher price because, you know, the materials and everything are much more expensive. But producing those allows me to fine-tune the files for printing on press as well. So you help me out in two ways. But and they come with a nice little sheet that details all the techniques and the science behind it as much as I could cram into one page. And it's perfect for framing. I think there's the sizes are 16 by 24 and 24 by 36 if you want to go big. But hey, if you want an even bigger one, just email me and I'll make you one bigger too.
I'll tell you, the prices are not even that bad. I mean,
oh my gosh.
Right. I expected this to be a lot more, to be honest with you.
Yes.
And even looking at your artist proof, that's not even that expensive. I think it's 50. I mean, I don't know if this is U.S. I'm assuming this is U.S.
It's Canadian, so it's even cheaper.
So it's $54.50 and $107.50 for the artist proof versions, which is not, for what you did, not expensive at all. So
no, exactly. I don't want to price this outside of the range of people to enjoy. I want people to buy this and throw it on their wall and have conversations about it and enjoy it and be inspired by it. Yes, I'll probably make a little bit of money on it, but I'm a professional photographer and you're helping me live and pay the bills by buying one. I don't want to get rich off something like this. So it's something that I want everybody to have.
Well, 2,500 hours, you deserve to make some money on it.
And I'm reading this right, that the poster, if I get the larger one, the 24 by 36, is only $28.75.
Yeah.
For the now that's for the offset printed one that's going to press. I'm talking with Friesens right now, which is one of the best printers in Canada for this kind of work. They're putting me up with the best quality paper that I could afford, and really making a fun go of this. And so I will be producing a production run of these that I'm hoping will also have a retail presence. I've got to have very difficult conversations with retailers to figure out how that's going to work. And of course, I make less money that way, but I want to get it in the hands of as many people as possible.
And I'm going to ask you something stupid, and I'm going to look stupid. What is the difference between the artist proof and the other one, the poster?
The artist proofs are done on a thicker luster quality paper that are printed on the large format printer here in my office at 600 DPI. The regular poster prints are done through a sheet fed press at 300 DPI, and they are produced on a slightly lighter weight paper, but it's a cost thing more than anything else. You can't run heavier papers that way and have them shipped in the same feasibility. So the artist proofs are me producing a version of that I can look at and say, yeah, that's awesome. And the poster prints, they end up coming in at a lower price point so that anybody can plaster one on their wall. I want these to be in classrooms. I want them to be everywhere. So
yeah, I can see this in
definitely I can see this in a science class.
Absolutely.
And when you tell somebody that every snowflake is different, I think people in their minds, so you said, yeah, they're probably not. They're how could they be different? But when you see your pictures up close, yeah, there's no way there could be two snowflakes the same.
Well, there are similar styles, I think, as Mike had mentioned, that as we go through the different weather conditions, you might have the big dendritic snowflakes that have the branches that look like trees. And that's the classic idea of what a snowflake is. And yeah, you'll find a lot that fit that bill. But man, there are some exotic crystals out there that really don't match anything you could imagine. And to me, those are actually the more fun ones to discover.
So let's see. In December, you're kicking off the poster. You're kicking off the once a day, a snowflake a day, which
these both happen today, by the way. So.
This is December 1st. This is the first of the month. Yeah. What else, before we get to the main topic we're going to talk about tonight, what else has Don been up to since we talked in June?
Well, we moved into our new house, and so we've been doing all those home renovations and what have you. I built a classroom in the room across from me. And so I do a lot of workshops and, the day-long sort of studio-style workshops. It's a lot of fun. We have award-winning gardens in the backyard, so I became a gardener out of an obligation to keep it up. And I do macro photography workshops in that award-winning garden. And so there's so much fun to be had with that. I've been doing a lot of teaching, a lot of presenting. I just got back from Grande Prairie, Alberta, which is in northern Alberta, doing some workshops out there. I've been all over the place. Last night I was speaking at the Richmond Hill Camera Club in the Toronto area. Just having a good time with photography and exploring and experimenting and doing a lot of fun stuff too, which goes into the topic du jour of sort of the science of photography. And I'm waiting right now for the temperatures to get cold enough for me to start into some really cool, fun experiments that I had started on with last year. And I think, Mike, you've got some, at least one image with a freezing soap bubble that might be a good kickoff to the topic that we talk about tonight.
Yeah, I think we've looked at that one before. I love that image. Let me find it here.
So one of the things I want to talk about with this particular image is how it's created, because, of course, the design that we have with this is somewhat random, and there's luck involved, and the flashlight has to be placed behind it and what have you. But the color that's created in there is done with a very interesting phenomenon. The color that's created within this soap bubble is using a phenomenon called birefringence. And something that photographers are generally not normally aware of, some of the physics and the science of light in a very, I guess, scientific kind of approach. But in this case, I wanted to create a color filter to give some crazy colors to this particular bubble. So there was a making of shot also that I had sent you from this particular bubble. It's sort of a setup shot that we had seen accidentally earlier.
We're going to see a bunch of accidents.
There we go. There we are. And so in this case, I have a flashlight that is beaming light through a special colored filter into that soap bubble. And that colored filter is using two polarizing filters, or polarizing films, rather. It's cheaper than buying camera filters for this purpose. And there's a cheap piece of plastic placed in between them. And so this invokes a really cool idea in physics where a lot of people are at least somewhat familiar with what a polarizing filter does. It removes reflections off of anything that's non-metallic. Because those reflections coming into the camera will often be on one particular wavelength, or not wavelength, but angle of light, or a plane. That's the word. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. The plane of light. And so you can filter those out. You can remove them by using a filter that can be aligned such that it will only let light in on a plane that is opposite to that. right? And so that's how those filters work. And if you put two of them in opposition to one another, well, then you'll cancel out all light. This is actually how variable neutral density filters work, so that you can adjust exactly how much light comes through or not. But the fun really happens when you put something in between the two of those filters when they're in direct opposition to one another. And if that thing that you place in between messes with the plane or the angle of light that it's coming through on that particular plane, then when it's filtered out from one side and then it gets manipulated in some way by that object and then passes through the other side, you'll get some strange psychedelic colors that come out. Every piece of cheap plastic, a CD case is what I used here, a broken piece of one. Christmas ornaments, plastic bottles, wrappers that any package would have came in. They are made of plastic that will create these weird psychedelic effects. So if you take two polarizing filters, put them in opposition, and in between you put piece of cheap plastic, then you'll see these crazy colors show up. And you know what? You don't even need to have two polarizing filters. You can take, a lot of photographers only have one, right? Well, hold it up to your computer monitor, because believe it or not, every computer monitor is polarized light. So that will act as the first layer polarization. And all you'd need is that CD case that's kicking around on your desk somewhere and the polarizing filter from your camera bag, and you can start to make some crazy psychedelic colors.
Wow. So that, I have the two images here. So that setup created this.
Yes, it did.
And of course, this is up in where you live, and during the winter, I imagine that's what's creating the crystals within the.
Well, we got about 10 below freezing here, okay. So that would be minus 10 Celsius to about minus 20 Celsius. That's probably the sweet spot for doing this kind of thing, and of course, very low wind, because if there's any wind, then the bubble will blow away, or as it starts to freeze. Actually, you've got parts of it that are solid, but parts of it that are still a bubble. And if the wind blows against that, it'll fracture it and it'll fall apart. So
right. One part's weaker than the other.
Exactly. So you have to be very careful with that. It's not as flexible.
Okay, so get down to some basics I can understand. How are you making a soap bubble to begin with?
Well,
just like a spray bottle or something?
No, I just there's a recipe to like just blowing bubbles through a little bubble wand is what I'm doing in this particular case. But in order to make them stick and stay, oftentimes they would pop on the snow.
Yeah.
So in order to get them nice and solid, you'd have to add a little bit of glycerin or white corn syrup into the bubble mixture. So 6 parts water, 2 parts liquid dish detergent, and 1 part glycerin or white corn syrup.
Okay. And you have that, it looks like maybe on a glass plate or something?
No, it's on a pile of snow.
Okay.
So I just created a slight mound of snow there so that it would create, so that the bubble would sit in the proper path of light from the flashlight. And it's funny because I actually just got an even bigger flashlight this year. So this thing is quite a beastly guy. This puts out in a very, very condensed beam, as you can see behind my head, 1,800 lumens of light from one LED. So I have another flashlight that does 4,000 lumens, but it's across 4 LEDs. So having the single LED as bright as it is here, 1,800 lumens from one LED, that's going to be the ticket. The trouble is it might be too bright, then generate too much heat, and that heat, if I heat up the inside of the bubble while it's trying to freeze, the temperature differential might cause some havoc. It might try to explode a little bit.
That may make an interesting shot.
It might. So I have no idea what I'm going to. But see, the thing is, this year I've got some really fun ideas for experimenting. I've got right here. This is a flashlight that emits ultraviolet light, and in this case, it's not bright enough for what I wanted to do. So I'm actually in the process of modifying a flash to emit only ultraviolet light. That's another story. We'll get to that. So what I want to do here is I've got this bucket or this jug of bubble solution that is specifically engineered to be ultraviolet sensitive so that it will fluoresce in ultraviolet light.
You normally just have a bucket of bubbles next to your desk?
Yeah, and I also have this bag of suspicious white powder sitting on my desk. That this, if you read it, it specifically says, you probably can't see it, but
it says suspicious white powder.
water-based UV sensitive fluorescing powder. So
yeah, that's what you just stamp that on there. It's okay.
Exactly. No, but so this will amp up the ultraviolet performance of that bubble solution, so that I can use an ultraviolet flash to illuminate these bubbles that will then translate that light back into the visible spectrum, so that it looks like the bubbles have no visible light source except for themselves.
Oh, that's awesome.
I have no idea if it'll work.
How did you figure that out? Did you read that somewhere, or is this just
no?
I'm just experimenting.
I experiment.
That is so cool.
It might turn into a colossal failure. I have no idea, but it's going to be a fun narrative to discuss, even if I fail.
Yeah.
And so I'm just waiting for the cold temperatures to try that experiment out.
Yeah, that experimenting like that is part of where you got to where you are. I'm sure you didn't first day you go out and was successful at the snowflakes. But that inquisitive nature and trying new things is what pays off. Some things don't work. Some things do work. It's the ones that work that pay off.
And
I can't wait to see some of that. Even if they fail, I can't wait to see some of it.
It's the journey more than the destination for me that I really enjoy. Like, for me, understanding light is one of the greatest things that photography has allowed me to do, because it lets me see things in a completely different way than I would ever normally be able to see the world. And, macro photography is one great example of that. Infrared, we've talked about that on this show before. And astrophotography and all this experimentation stuff. This is really where things get interesting in photography, because you step outside of the realm of what people find familiar. And what people find familiar is often the most photographed stuff. So the further away you go from familiarity, you get into a more unique kind of world. And the more unique you can be in your photography, the more you'll stand out. So that's sort of the mantra that I go by anyhow. And I try to do things that are unique, that nobody has done before, or even if they have, fewer people have. And so my approach becomes unique in and of itself.
I think most of us photographers think of light as your morning or afternoon or sunrise light, your harsh light or your soft light, and that's about it. That's about the parameters that we deal within. Some specifics inside of that, but that's where we stop thinking about light, right, Tim? At least that's where I stop. Is those kind of parameters.
You think about it more than you've just mentioned, because you think about focal length as well, right? I mean, that's a decision that you have to make, what focal length you shoot with. And I've got this particular lens right here. This is a Rokinon 8mm fisheye lens, and I had a problem with this because it's designed to work on either a full frame camera or a crop sensor camera. On a full frame camera, it will create more of a circular image, and it was on sale, so I wanted to play with that. But on a full frame camera, it had a lens hood around it that was visible in the shot, so it was obscuring the circle that I was able to see.
Right.
The lens hood was non-removable, so I had to cut it off with a hacksaw. You'll see some marks sort of along the edges where I had to cut that off. And then when I did, I realized that the lens will actually spin because the front element is on a thread. And so this front element, I'm looking at this and thinking, okay, now this is going to be cool, because let me just shift my camera's focus here to see if I can get this really close. And I'm not sure if that actually made any noticeable change at all. But the idea is that if I can take this and if I can put this in front of this, as out of focus as that may be, you can see a much, much wider view of everything around, so long as you can put it in the proper focus. Unfortunately, my webcam is misbehaving. But the point is that I have the ability then to take this as a creative tool and think, okay, well, how can I apply that to another scenario, right? How can I use this fisheye optic as a component of another image? And so now that introduces some interesting compositional possibilities. I could have an image framed very beautifully, but have a fisheye lens in the corner of the frame that shows everything outside the edges of the frame. in the same image, which is a great learning tool when I'm teaching photography and about what to include or exclude from the photo, and have that, as something that people can visually see all together in one frame without any trickery, right? And so I'm constantly trying to say, okay, well, maybe what I'm trying to create is something that I can't even imagine, that experimentation is just going to end up being some sort of happy accident along the way. And then, we're off to the races. And I just got this the other day too. This is a fun piece of gear. This is a giant camera.
Yeah.
That's because it has a wide
and a giant lens.
Yes, this is a Linhof Technorama 617 medium format camera. So it's designed to, if I can take the back off of this, it's designed to shoot a 6 centimeter by 17 centimeter
panoramic
frame of medium format film. And so it's unbelievably panoramic, right? And so I just, it's just out of the frame here. I just got a bunch of medium format film to start playing around with this particular camera. I've never shot medium format before. I've shot large format and 35 millimeter. But I expect the resolution out of this to be quite phenomenal based on the size of the negative. It's wider than a 4x5 negative would be, so the resolution would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 megapixels or so.
Wow.
On one shot. Now, where do you get that developed then?
Well, for the black and white stuff, I can develop that myself.
Okay.
You have your own developing lab there?
Well, for black and white, it's actually really easy when you're developing film, because you can use a development tank that allows you to not have a darkroom or anything. You load up the film inside this tank in a changing bag that's light tight.
Okay.
And then you follow the sort of the formula, that the timing and what have you, for the particular emulsion of black and white film. And there's a great app called the Massive Dev Chart on it's on iOS. I'm sure it's on Android as well, that will give you all of the timings based on the developer that you're using, based on the film, based on the concentration of the developer and what have you, and exactly how to time it as it goes through. So you pour in the different pieces, let it sit for how long it needs to, dump it out, pour in the next bit. And this can all be done sort of in your kitchen or what have you. So it's an interesting thing to do. Black and white film development is pretty easy. If you screw it up, well, it's your own fault, but it's a worthy experiment nonetheless.
Yeah.
For the color stuff, C41 processing uses organic chemicals that I really don't want to be messing with myself. So I send that out to a lab in Toronto that would do the color stuff for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Let me look at some of these other images. You sent us a lot of images.
I did, and I have no idea what I sent. It was, and so whatever you bring up next will, go off on another tangent.
Yeah. Well, how about this one here?
So because we're kind of talking on the science of light, have you any idea what this is a picture of, Mike?
I'm looking at that, and I'm looking over here, not at you, because that's where the image is for me. Not only trying to figure out what it is, but what it is sitting on, because it looks like it's bubbles sitting on bubbles.
Almost looks like it's on leather,
or like some kind of soft drink. But it looks
you're
oily.
Right, you're right about drink.
It looks
and you're
oily.
right about oily.
But what is an oily drink? I don't know what an oil. Could it be like a? I don't know. Okay, I give up.
Okay, it's coffee. It's Turkish coffee specifically. Okay. So what happens? Coffee beans naturally have oil in them, and so Turkish coffee is brewed with sort of a very, very fine powder-like coffee that sits on top. That as the water is heated, kind of melts in, fiddles down to the bottom, and then bubbles back up. It's a really interesting brewing process, but the bubbles are not formed by milk or any other additives. It's formed by the coffee itself. And thereby, with the coffee beans right in there, can have a higher than expected oil content when you're considering regular coffee. And the oil in that bubble creates a really fun optical phenomenon called thin film interference. And thin film interference, you've seen it in soap bubbles, oil slicks, and what have you. You don't often see it in coffee. That's why it was a fun image to show. And you don't often see it in snowflakes. I believe I might have sent you some colorful snowflakes as well that exhibit the same properties of thin film interference as these coffee bubbles do. And either way, what happens is you have a very, very thin layer of oil or air, or depending on exactly where the interference is happening. And so in the case of a snowflake, it's easier to explain with ice. So in a snowflake, you will have a bubble that forms inside the ice. It happens quite often. The physics explain exactly that. Yeah, like this. And so if those bubbles are the right thickness, then it makes the ice on either side of that bubble incredibly thin. And that very, very thin layer of ice will interact with light in an interesting way. Some light hitting off the surface of the ice will bounce right off. Okay, that's expected. Okay. Some of it will enter into the ice and bounce off of the interior ice air layer, right? That interior boundary where the bubble starts, and then bounce out on the same trajectory. Now, if the layer of ice is thin enough, then the light that was entering into the ice has slowed down by a very small margin because the ice has a different density. And then when it moves back up, it will rejoin the existing light, but interferes with it, such that it's out of sync. Wow. And so you have constructive interference that amplifies certain colors and destructive interference that negates other colors. And so for any given thickness within that ice, you will have a different color that's represented. And so there's tons of crazy physics when it comes down to light and how light is manipulated and how it works in many different ways.
That is, you think about the snowflake itself. It is incredibly thin. So you're talking about differences that I don't know what scale of difference we're talking about here.
Microns.
You can't take out a ruler here. And that minute amount of difference is creating this effect?
That's right. So you're talking about differences where if it goes into and then back out of the layer of ice, it has to be within a wavelength difference of the light itself. So we're talking nanometers there, and there's different orders of interference as well that might be a bit more faint to be noticed. But you're talking microns or nanometers here, and it's so you have usually 3 or 4 snowstorms a year where I am that will produce potentially colorful crystals. It's not a common occurrence, but when they come, man, you got to get out there and shoot them, because I photograph them every year, and I'm always just like giddy like a kid on Christmas when I get these things falling from the sky, because they are a treasure. They are so much fun to work with.
So when someone's looking at this thing, their first thought may be, look at it, he photoshopped in some color, but this really happened.
Yes, that really happened. The color inside of these snowflakes. Yeah. I believe I might have sent you at least another one there as well, Mike.
Now, what are you using to light the snowflake? Because this is inside. You're doing this inside your house, right?
Of course not. I'm outside in the freezing cold. Yeah. I mean, 2 feet from my back door, mind you. But it's I'm suffering. The snowflake is comfortable. So I'm using a ring flash in order to light this. It's the most convenient source for lighting these guys. And I usually turn 1/2 of the ring off so that I could get the light coming in sort of on an angle from one side.
I mentioned
and that angle is important to use. These are all photographed using reflected light, which is important to note that most people in the past had photographed snowflakes using transmitted light coming from behind the crystal on a microscope slide using microscopes and what have you. But here, using reflected light, that thin film interference pattern can show itself. And it kind of saddens me to think that every other photographer before they started using reflected light to do these missed out on one of the most magical pieces of these subjects, the color that you can see within them.
I said earlier how the snowflakes are basically following several groups that are basically, they're different. Every one of them is different, but there's categories of look. This one I have up right now, I don't recall seeing this look on any of the ones I've seen in years of past. I've seen hundreds of your snowflakes.
The smaller crystals are usually hexagons.
Yeah.
And so the hexagonal crystals. Now, it's interesting because if you look at this crystal, you can figure out some really cool fundamental physics about how a snowflake actually grows. Look at the corners. Notice how they're starting to grow out a little bit more than the rest of the sides. Mm-hmm. That's where the branches are about to form if this thing had stayed in the cloud longer. And the fundamental here is that the further things stick out, the more water vapor they can collect.
So
Right?
this
And
is a baby snowflake.
This is a baby snowflake.
Yes.
This is about 1 millimeter or so in diameter. And so the further things stick out, the more that they collect water vapor. And then they'll hit what's called the branching instability, where the corners will start to grow a little bit more than the rest. And as soon as they start to stick out a little bit more, they'll collect even more water vapor and grow even faster.
Further and faster and faster.
It's exponential. But pay attention also to the bubbles inside the ice. Right near the center, they started with colors. But those bubbles are forming in the thin edge of the crystal. Because if you imagine the snowflake as a three-dimensional thing that's not flat, it's a prism that has some thickness to it, then the center of those thin edges will be receiving less water vapor than the top and bottom edges of it. And because they're receiving less water vapor in the center part, then a cavity starts to form. And that cavity is where these bubbles are created. Everything that you see here is based on that same principle, that what sticks out the farthest gets the most growth.
Interesting.
And that's true of most snowflakes.
All right, I have an image I want to bring up, but before we do that, I want to bring this one up. Is this the effect you were talking about with
Not quite, but this is another fun experiment. So I was waiting for the sun to set here when I was about to do some astrophotography. Great location, Killarney Provincial Park here in Ontario. And so I had time to kill. And so in my bag, I had my infrared camera. And I also had rented to me for that day a fisheye lens, a circular fisheye lens, which I don't normally own. I've got one now. I own one now, but I didn't own one then. And so I started playing around. And I had this other filter that I had bought. It's a very unusual filter. I don't want to say rare because anybody can go buy one, but very few people ever find a use for it. It's called a hot mirror filter. Have you ever heard of that before, Mike?
No, I've not. No.
So hot mirror filter it looks pretty much completely transparent to the naked eye. But to an infrared camera, it's reflective. It reflects all infrared light. It acts like a mirror in infrared. Now, why do I need this? Well, I have a specific camera that can detect and use ultraviolet light exclusively, except it's still slightly sensitive to infrared. So this filter on the ultraviolet camera will reflect the infrared light from entering into the camera so that I can do a pure, true ultraviolet kind of shot. But it's in my camera bag. And I figure, well, I'm going to hold that up in front of my infrared camera to see exactly what happens. And look at that. It's a mirror. So it's reflecting a picture of me and my camera back to make a very unique selfie. It is a circular fisheye infrared hot mirror selfie.
Yeah, that is unique.
I think if you asked most people, they always said you did this in Photoshop.
Yeah.
This was not taken in one picture.
That's taken in one picture.
Yeah, and most people would never believe that.
You know,
Not in today's day and age.
I say I've not heard of a hot mirror filter, and now I'm starting to think that back in the old days of the Nikon D2H, I seem to recall something about a hot mirror filter. People adding that to the D2H because to combat some issue they were having with the D2H.
Maybe some of the earlier sensors might have been more sensitive to infrared light than modern sensors were. Yeah. Of course, they were more useful in an era of darkroom photography where it could reflect heat away from something, right? That would not be necessarily important in certain ways. There's lots of old school uses for these things. There's very few modern uses for these kinds of filters, except if you have an ultraviolet modified camera, which I have in my camera bag. So I've got this other weird piece of gear for that. And so I just try to fit these puzzle pieces together in any interesting and cool way. And that's one fun example.
Yeah, it makes you want to go out. It makes me, Tim, want to go out and experiment with, try different things. I don't do enough of that.
Not at all.
I stay in my safety wheelhouse.
Yeah, my comfort zone.
In my comfort zone, and just do that little bit. I don't experiment nearly enough. And in digital,
shame on both of you.
I know. And in a digital age, what am I risking for not doing that? I don't.
You know, a lot of the experiments that I do, they end up in complete failure.
But that's fine.
I'm the first to admit that. And that's okay, because it's not like I'm walking away with nothing. I'm walking away with the thought that, okay, that didn't work. Not going to do that again, but what else does? Mm-hmm. And, if I gain knowledge in the process, then, I'm better for it, I think. So, all
right, let's
talk about those ultraviolet bubbles. You don't know if it may work or it may not work.
Exactly.
If it works, it might be spectacular. Right.
And if it doesn't, well, it was a fun ride.
Right.
Let's talk about this one.
All right. Well, Mike, what do you think this is?
The Northern Lights.
The Northern Lights. You're right. Now, Tim, how many images of the Northern Lights do you think I've combined here?
Haha, I got the easy one, Tim.
Yeah, thanks. 'Cause I was going to say Northern Lights. Thanks. 2.
How many jelly beans are in the jar?
Knowing Don, your answer is 2?
I'm just going to go with the easy one because I know I'm never going to get it right. So
I'm going to go with 20 plus.
693.
Oh, hey, I was right.
Yeah.
20 plus, yes.
More than 20, sure.
Wow.
We'll give that to you.
Mark Finders says 600.
Flinders, yes.
692. He got it right.
93, 693, Mark. He's one of my students in the Arcanum, and is a great guy. And so he's seen this image before, so he knows the story. But
Wow.
I took these images as part of a time lapse video, and each and every one of them was beautiful. Some of them I had printed individually, and the time lapse video was great. But I was thinking to myself, you know what? This is just something that needs an extra bit of experimentation. And so the way that you put together star trail photographs in Photoshop is you load them all up into Photoshop as layers, and then you select them all and change their blending mode to lighten. And what happens when you do that is for every layer, Photoshop will analyze the pixel brightness. And for whatever layer in that specific pixel has the brightest pixel, it will show that through. So in a star trail image, of course, as the star moves from one point to another point, the brightest pixel now transfers to another part of that frame, but the old one is still there from another frame, so the star trail grows. And so, of course, you see the stars across this image because the stars were, of course, in the sky. But the Northern Lights, as they danced across the sky, covered this entire frame. And where they were their brightest in any given frame, they now show through across about an hour and a half. This was 693 images, each of them 8 seconds long, and whatever small gap in between the frames, which was negligible. But and done with a fisheye lens. So I had to correct the horizon line on each image identically. Which is, I had to do it once and then set that up as a Photoshop action and then let that run through. That took a day or so for Photoshop to just churn through those numbers. And then to load them all up, to load 693 full-res TIFF files into Photoshop, took over 100 gigs of RAM. Again, my computer is a bit of a behemoth for this sort of stuff. And then changed that blending mode to lighten, and I was just... again, that kid on Christmas, you opened up that present and it's exactly what you wanted it to be. And so there you have it. It's another fun experiment.
Yeah. And I know you and I could geek out on computer stuff all day long, but you have a really high-end computer. I know a lot of photographers these days want to go laptop. I always get questions from photographers, what laptop should I buy? You're never going to get the power that you need like Don with a laptop. It's desktop.
Right.
I mean, you might get close, but you're not going to get anywhere where you want it to be. There are some companies out there like Eurocom that stuff desktop like hardware inside of a laptop, and it's not a light, pretty thing to carry around with you. If you're looking for that, you're not going to get it with the horsepower that you need. That said, Intel is constantly coming out with better i7 processors. I've got the Surface Pro 3 with the i7 in there, and I can do some light duty stuff. I did some 3D rendering work for one of my clients while I was traveling abroad, and they needed it within a deadline, and the Surface Pro line was able to handle that when it was fully spec'd out. But I could not do this kind of work. I could not even dream of doing this on that.
In most of those laptops, you have a mobile version of the processor, and you have a mobile version of the GPU, which means that Core i7 may not be a quad-core multi-thread to 8 cores. It may be a dual-core multi-thread to 4 cores.
The thing is here, it's not so much, and I wish it was, but it's not so much the number of cores you have, because we were talking before we started recording that I've got 24 cores and 48 threads across 2 physical processors in this machine, and Photoshop underutilizes it woefully. I don't have nearly the amount of throughput that I want to make this stuff happen very fast, but the issue is RAM. The amount of memory that Photoshop uses when it has to juggle all of these images around in active memory. This is true of focus stacking when I'm dealing with my snowflakes and my macro work. It's true of combining these images together. Anything that has an exorbitant number of layers, like the snowflake poster, that's a 12 gigabyte file on my computer. And that as soon as I load it up, it's immediately using around 70 gigabytes of RAM.
Wow.
As soon as I start to do things with it, it's using over 100. And, my computer has 128 gigs of RAM. I thought that was just, the cost difference was maybe a couple of $100 for me to go from 64 to 128 when you're dealing with server RAM. So I figured, well, why not? I might find a use for it someday. And I'm glad I did. On most desktop computers, if people are looking to buy a system, they might be looking at 8 to 16 gigs of RAM. Enthusiasts might throw 32 or 64 gigs of RAM in there. 64 is about the highest that you can get on an enthusiast computer. And, using the server hardware that I have the ability to push that farther. If you don't have that, then my day of processing for some of this stuff might have taken a week. It'll still be possible. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. It just has to page all of that information back to your hard drive, which is 1,000 times slower. And so, you just have to deal with speed.
My recommendation to most photographers is the minimum, the new starting minimum. And I'm coming from a PC side, but I imagine the same thing is true for a Mac. Is 16 gig of RAM. That's your minimum start.
I would say absolutely. That's a great minimum.
You're gonna be shooting yourself in the foot with 8 so often.
Well, 8. Well, yeah, you'll find a lot of scenarios where 8 won't necessarily cover what you want. And especially moving forward, if you want to buy a great computer that's going to last you a couple of years, in a couple of years, 8 gigs of RAM is not going to cut it as a minimum. So 16, I think, is a great minimum to have. And really, when you're looking at computer hardware and prices, go for the 32. Yeah. There's no reason why you should skimp on that. When you spend so much on your camera and all of your photography gear, it's a marginal increase in price to make a huge impact on, I don't want to say future-proofing because that's a bad word.
Yeah,
There's nothing that's future-proof.
Yeah.
But it'll at least give you a little bit more leg room to deal with.
I don't do near the stuff you do, Don, with all the different, blending all these images together. I have 32 gig on my machine, and I often wish that I had more. So when I say 16 is a minimum, I truly think that is the minimum. If you can't afford any more than 16, then okay, you can skimp by with 16. But look at going beyond that. Look at going to 32 or even 64 or something
exactly.
like that. If you're building your own computer, and I did that, I got us off track. If you're building your own computer, get motherboards that can handle 64 gig of RAM, even if you don't buy it right day one. If you don't get a motherboard that can handle 64 gig, then you're locked in. There's nothing you can do without changing that out.
No, and then when you change your motherboard, you're going to be buying a new CPU anyhow. You might as well just get a whole new computer.
All right, so to get us back on track, let's look at this. Let's look at this image.
So this was a fun one because this was another point of experimentation with infrared photography, and I realized that in this case, the image on the left is done in visible light. The image on the right is done in infrared. The same lens, different camera modified for that purpose. Mike, where the heck is that flare coming from?
Oh, I'm going to guess the sun.
Well, okay, yeah, okay. Easy answer.
Okay, that was my question. Ask Tim the next one.
Go to Tim there, thanks.
Go ahead.
Why is it on the infrared camera and not on the visible light camera?
The flare?
Well, I mean, I think I could see it a little bit on the visible light camera.
It's there, but it's
a little bit
far.
Not as dramatic. Yeah. I mean, it is much more on the infrared, and it's the same lens. You're saying it's not even a different lens.
Same lens.
It's I'm guessing the wavelength and how it bounces through the lens or something.
You got a good word there, wavelength. That's an important one.
Throw out some key words and maybe some of them stick. That's my.
When we're talking about the coatings that go on lenses, you know how they're always preaching about the latest and greatest multi-coatings and all of these kinds of lenses and what have you. How do those coatings actually work? What the heck do they do? Well, most of them work on the principles of thin film interference, which we talked about with the soap bubbles and the snowflakes and the coffee and all that. The same thing's happening with every single lens, and they can manipulate light. such that they can cause those glares and flares and reduction in contrast to be mitigated by putting these coatings that are very specific to the wavelength of light, because they use thin film interference, right? Thin film interference is the principle that a lot of them are engineered on. Now, infrared uses a different wavelength of light. So that means those coatings on the lens are either ineffective or counterproductive, or both. And so I don't know if they're actually causing more trouble than they're preventing. I haven't had an actual experimental test for that, although I've got the equipment here to do it. Just haven't had the time to see exactly if it's detrimental or just having no effect. But yeah, so it's the coatings on the lenses that are not engineered for infrared photography. It's as if presuming that the lens has no coatings on it at all.
Yeah, yeah. Cool effect.
Right, and they don't worry about that to put a coating on that, because most cameras are not going to be accounting for infrared.
Exactly. That's not the way the camera is engineered.
Right. It's not
I got another slide up that I probably should have started with, but maybe we can end with it because we're coming up on the hour, is this one.
Ah, yes. Okay, so this is fun. This shows the quality of artificial light. And so I'm using a xenon flash here, one that I've specifically modified to allow it to emit ultraviolet light, and which is part of the thing that I'll be using for my my bubble experiment. But if I pass this through a special filter that will split light, it's a diffraction grating. That's an astronomical quality one that I can attach to the front of my lens, and I can create this spectrum effect of light. So I can take whatever light source I have and I can split it up into all sorts of different wavelengths. So I can see exactly how even the spectrum is. Now you can tell this is xenon, but not really through the visible spectrum, because it's pretty even through the visible spectrum. And that's why xenon is used in most camera flashes. But in the infrared, you'll notice some spikes, some brighter areas that denote very specific sort of spectrum peaks. And this is a fingerprint for that particular kind of light source. This is also the technique that scientists and astronomers use to figure out what's inside of a planet's atmosphere or a star that's light years away. They can do a spectrum analysis of the light source and identify the fingerprints within it and tell what actual elements are present within that. But I'm using this for photographic purposes. So the top is my regular visible light camera, and so it's pretty even there. Infrared has a few deviations, but you can see where the visible light and the infrared cameras kind of fall off one another.
Yeah.
And this is where, when I did this test, I realized I needed that hot mirror filter for the ultraviolet camera because it was still slightly responsive in the infrared spectrum. But I wanted to include this because not all lights are made equal. Xenon is great, but some light sources are absolutely terrible. I've got a bag of see if I can get this. I got a bag of lights. These we just bought a new house, so this bag of lights that I have jingling here. This is old CFLs and incandescent bulbs and all sorts of other things. So in this, if we have a compact, or this is not a compact, but this is just a fluorescent tube.
Yeah.
This uses specific types of gases to create what our eyes perceive as completely even light across the way. It's missing about half the spectrum, or it's actually missing more so when we dig in to the horribly dirty compact fluorescents. These are the worst possible light sources for you to use when you're photographing something, because what happens with those is you're missing about half the spectrum of light. So if you have a particular color of orange or blue in a product or a model's outfit, well, if the light emitted from the light source is incomplete, well, then you might not have the proper frequency response reflecting off of the object coming back to the camera. And some colors will become darker or brighter than they should, or will become different colors altogether.
Wow, never thought of that.
So yeah, if you're using artificial light to light your subject, it's very important what kind of light you actually use, because if you're missing parts of the spectrum, then you're not going to get the proper response back to the camera that you might expect. For me, I don't do a lot of model shooting, but I do a lot of printing. So when I'm framing a picture and I'm putting lights on it, the lights in my house. That's why all of these compact fluorescent tubes are in here, because these guys here are absolutely terrible for showing art and showing proper color. They're terrible. Don't buy these things. But they're also not in the garbage because these contain mercury, so recycle them properly.
Yeah. So what kind of light should you use? What LEDs, or LEDs good?
Yeah, LEDs are getting better and better. They do have a bit of a drop off in many cases in the blue spectrum, but they're fairly even across the board. And I'm sure that technology is evolving far more rapidly than any other lighting tech. So I'm sure that they will continue to improve. The standard old incandescent bulb, this is a 100-watt bulb from God knows how old. And it's funny because I replaced this with a 9-watt LED bulb. Yeah. And I'm thinking, seriously, it's giving out the same amount of light. This is wrong.
And
it's a good thing.
A lot less heat.
A lot less heat. Yeah.
Yes.
Saving my energy bill so that I can run my computer here. But incandescent light produces a fairly even spectrum that mimics something like the sun gives out. And so too does halogen lights. Halogen lights are great. The lights above me in my studio here, they're high wattage bulbs in comparison. There's 3 40-watt bulbs kind of in the fixture above me and in the room opposite me, sort of behind. But they have the best spectrum of light, halogen. That's why you'll find companies like Solux. Solux produces halogen lights that are often used in museums and galleries and what have you because of their color rendition properties. And so, if you want the best color rendition, incandescents, halogens, those are great. If you're looking more economically and you want to save on the energy bill, then LEDs are getting there. They're getting much, much better. So I'm actually in the process of doing a spectrum analysis of all of these different light sources and different bulbs, even if they're using the same technology, to see the differences. And I want to grab a bunch of different LED bulbs as well to see exactly what the best options are. There is a metric called the color rendering index that is supposed to calculate this stuff in a sort of a basic number that we can all understand, but I don't think that it covers things quite as accurately as I'd like. And I know that we're coming up on the hour here, Tim, but I want to kind of talk about one more thing here before we end off.
And I wanted to ask you about how are you doing the light testing? You said color spectrum analysis.
So I created a cardboard box, very fancy equipment, and I bought some straight razor blades off of Amazon for about $2. Okay. And so cut a hole in the box, put these straight razor blades so that I can create a very, very small slit of light. And then inside that box, I can place my light source, whatever it happens to be. It could be a flash, a tube, a bulb, anything, whatever it happens to be. It'll all fit in there, and the light will come through that slit. That slit is picked up by a diffraction grating that is mounted on the front of my camera that will then split the spectrum out. And it will show me the entire spectrum of light, what's missing, what's there. And there is software that can analyze that mathematically to create some proper numbers for me to deal with. And it will actually create a graph that I can sort of figure all this stuff out from. Yeah.
Before you go to your thing there, Mark asks, what would you recommend for a constant light source? Are LEDs okay?
LEDs are okay. Like I said, I just invested into this gigantic monster of a light, which I won't flash into my camera because I might break my camera.
And blind me.
But as far as a constant light source, I would either use, depending on the scenario, of course, it's all relative. If I'm doing product photography, I'll use halogen bulbs. In fact, I bought some of those halogen task lights, the stuff for workshops and what have you. Right. You can get them on sale for like $10 or $15. They got the little metal cage around them. They're pretty durable.
Crazy hot though, aren't they?
Yeah, they get real hot. So, I mean, be careful with those things. That's why they have the metal cage around them so you don't burn yourself. But those make for great continuous lights when you're doing small-scale product photography. You can get it all set up, turn the lights on, take the picture, then turn the lights off, and they're cheap, and the quality of light is great. For more general use, I would say LEDs, absolutely. Avoid fluorescence at all cost. There are some good fluorescent tubes out there, but they are nowhere near as good as the LEDs. And the LEDs, of course, come in at a far less heat factor. So that's always important if you're dealing with models or you're dealing with video work where heat can be a problem.
Yep. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yep. So what are you going to share with us there?
So I have 2 prints. Now, these are prints of one of my favorite images. This is my Maple Leaf flag photograph. And so both of these prints are made on slightly different papers. And so I want to see if I can do an experiment here as we end off to show you guys the difference in paper quality here.
Okay.
Not necessarily paper quality, but the addition of something called optical brightening agents. Are you familiar with what those are?
I'm not, no.
Not the first time I heard of it.
All right. So I am going to have to do a little bit of running around here. I have to turn off the lights in the room and turn off the light above me in order for me to show you this experiment properly. So bear with me for about 30 seconds.
Why don't we do this while you're setting up? I will do some of my closing stuff, get that stuff out of the way.
Sure.
And then when I'm done with that, we can go to you for that.
Or just play the Benny Hill music. It's fine.
If I had that ready and I wouldn't get in a copyright issue, I would. All right. So while Don's setting it up, this December, as I mentioned in the first part of the show, is when we kick off our best of the year photo contest. We'll have something on our Facebook group, Facebook page, and our website where you can learn more about that. Unlike most of our months where we have a photo contest and you know the prizes you get on our Facebook page and a few other things, in this case, with the best of the year photo contest, we go through some of the normal judging, but then we end up with celebrity judges. One of our celebrity judges this year is Don. We'll have a number of others, and we have actual prizes, including Amazon gift cards, and something like this book right here.
Oh, look at that.
JPEG Raw is going to buy this book. This is mine. You can't have this one because this one, whoops, don't spill my water on it. This one, let me find, is signed. I can show you. Is signed by Don.
But you know what, Mike? I will sign whatever book you buy for your winner. And I will even because we have to work with the details, but I'll even personally sign it to them if they want as well.
Okay, very good. Well, we're going to buy one of these books for the winner. You're going to get this book, plus you get gift cards, plus we got other things going on. It's your best photo that you took in 2015. Be looking for that. We'd also love to have you come over to our forums, jpegtheraw.com/forums, where Tim is crazy active over there, posting all the time.
I was, and then I suddenly stopped. I don't know why.
I don't know what's going on. I mentioned our Facebook group, which is easy to find, Facebook.com/group/jpegtheraw. Come over there, and that's where we have most of our activity. Tim's also posting like a madman over there all the time. And then to help us buy things like Don's book, it's actually not that expensive, but it does cost something. We're going to buy that. Plus, we have the Amazon gift cards. Plus, we have some other things. We use the funds we get from our Amazon affiliate, which is jpegtheraw.com/Amazon. Use that link. It's on our website, or you can just type that in directly before you go to Amazon to buy anything. Thinking about buying holiday gifts this year, anything like that. We did a gift show last week or 2 weeks ago. Any of those gifts, like you're going to buy, anything you're going to buy, it doesn't have to be photo related, on Amazon, use our link before you go there. Or if you're going to use Topaz Labs, we have a link for that, which is jpegtheraw.com/Topaz Labs. All that gives us credit that we use to give back to the photography community. And the best way to get this show, in case you came in late or you want to know when the next one's going to be out, is to subscribe. We're basically everywhere you are: iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Podomatic, Podbean, and other places I can't even remember. If we're not where you want us to be, let me know and we'll try to get there. All right, Don, we're ready for you.
You're ready for me. Okay, so I've got this a couple of things. Probably the best experiment would be to show you this box that I had shipped to me quite a while ago. It's just sitting on my desk, but this is white, as you would normally see it as white, correct?
Yep.
Right? And roughly the same brightness between the shipping label and the box itself, right?
Right.
Right.
Well, I have this flashlight here. This is an ultraviolet flashlight. So if I put that on the front of this, you'll notice that the beam does not get as bright on this white as it does on this white, right? Yep. And as I move it around, you'll see that on the labels, it is far brighter than it is on the actual box itself, right? Yep. Why is that?
Is that tape? Is there tape there?
No, that's just the label itself. The label is a different material.
Okay.
Because the label contains optical brightening agents.
Right, for the equipment in the shipper's business.
Well, not necessarily. Optical brightening agents are fluorescent. And we've all seen this to some degree or another if you have snow where you live. Because if you take a white sheet of paper or anything white and you put it out on snow, it will look purple compared to the snow next to it that should be white, right? Because the paper contains optical brightening agents that, from the ambient light from the atmosphere, has some ultraviolet light in it, will reflect back in the visible spectrum, roughly slightly purple, and you see that slight color shift. So these optical brightening agents allow for more light to reflect off the surface than visible light would normally allow. And this is true from a lot of papers as well. If you're looking to print your work, this is an important consideration because it might skew colors based on the light source that you happen to have. So I have one print here, and you'll notice how much light is reflecting off of that in this particular case, right?
Yep.
With a flashlight. And I have another print here. How much light is reflecting off of that?
A lot less, yes.
A lot less, yes.
Swallow it.
So this is no optical brightening agents in the paper, and it gives a far more predictable look to the paper. It's more expensive paper, or in this case, canvas. But the more expensive is actually giving you a benefit because those optical brightening agents, if I flip this around the right way, these optical brightening agents, they decay over time. They can cause slight yellowing in the paper because it's not like they're radioactive or anything, but they are not archival.
So when it decays, is it an uneven decaying so that the image has an uneven look to it maybe also?
That can be a part of it, especially like on the edges of a frame where if there's shadows cast on part of the frame and not on others based on the lighting conditions in the room, yes, things can get uneven. So whenever you're looking for paper, and this again goes back down to the physics of light, you want to play around with stuff that has no optical brightening agents in it. This is going to be the winner. This is the one that I ship out and sell to somebody. The other one was a test from a roll of paper, and I didn't buy another roll of it because I was unimpressed with the quality of the results. Now, that's not to say that optical brightening agents are a terrifying thing that you never want. If I were to hold up a copy of Sky Crystals and use this light on it, those pages would glow. Most pages are affected by optical brightening agents. It's just the nature of the beast. Only extreme high-end papers do not use it. And for almost every mass production, they're using optical brightening agents to brighten up the paper, to give it that brightness that really makes things shine in it. Only when you're getting into the high-end printing world will you be able to decide and choose specifically to not have them. They'll use different materials that are more expensive that reflect more light, and for us as photographers, that can be an advantage. So again, that all boils down to how light interacts with objects around us, and optical brightening agents can be avoided if we want to.
If I'm a photographer and I'm buying, let's say, a larger print, 16 by 24 or 20 by 30, something like that I'm going to have for a client, and I'm buying it, going online to White House Custom Color, Miller's, or one of those other places, am I going to get one with the brightening agent in there? Am my paper going to have that in there? Or can
I'm about to test this out, actually. I just got an account at White House Custom Color, and what I'm going to be doing here is I will be getting a series of prints from a lot of different print vendors using a lot of different technologies, and I'll be printing the same thing on all of them. And so I will test the optical brightening agents properties and the whiteness and sort of how they process things. But I'll also take one set of them and stick them in the window of my sunroom and leave it there for a couple of months, and then take it down and compare it to the ones that I had stuck in a drawer and see what the differences are. Because there's lots of differences in paper quality, and some of them affect the archival nature of the paper that you're using. So to answer your question, I don't know yet, but it's, again, one of those things I'm experimenting with.
When you do that, are you going to post that online?
Of course. No, I'm gonna keep it to myself.
Well,
no, of course I'm gonna share it.
If you can remember, please reach out to us when you do that. I would love to see that and read that myself, and then we'll post it, on our social media, because that is I'd love to find out what happens there. That is good information once you get done with it. And I know how you're a stickler to details. This will be information that is not coming from Mike, who did I was about to say a curse word, a half job coming up to the results. Is going to be good results that are going to be meaningful. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
Yeah, well, and so I got to clone myself or something. There's not enough time in the day to do all of these fun experiments that I have on my table. But as I keep experimenting, where did I put that? My desk is a complete disaster now. As I'm moving everything, there we are. If you can see, I've got this white powder here, and just to prove that this is UV fluorescing powder, I think I need to do this to show you that yes, this is not any contraband of any kind. This is UV fluorescing powder. So no people knocking at my door, please.
We have video proof.
Yeah.
You talking about cloning yourself. Since we've had you on the show, now multiple times. I think you've done a lot in your professional world. In your personal world, I believe during this time frame got married.
I have,
going on.
yes.
At some point, maybe a family will be started.
It's in the planning stages. There's nothing to announce or anything at this point. But there's lots of things going on in life.
I'm saying that to say the draw on your time will never get less. It's only going to increase.
But you know what, Mike? I'm also never going to retire because I love what I do. This is the kind of stuff that I find so interesting and fascinating that I enjoy my work. And yes, some of it is boring. Like, I can't tell you how boring it is to measure 400 snowflakes. But the result is so worth it. And as I move on to more experiments and continue to explore these different things, that fascination factor, that curiosity to keep exploring just keeps me interested. So,
and it's your vision. You have a vision of where you want to go with it. And that's why I guess you're willing to spend the time it takes to make those measurements and do that work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And, all that we've mentioned, too many to list here, but I know December kicks off several things for you. You're also in the works of starting your own show over on the TWIP network.
Yeah, it's going to be called Inside the Lens, and it's going to cover, a lot of the stuff that we talked about here. The science of photography, also the psychology of why we find things beautiful and human perception and all of those kinds of things. And technology, new emerging technology, not like a gear review or lusting over the latest and greatest stuff, but more deep into the underlying tech. And so I've recorded 3 episodes so far. Number 1 is with Frederick Van Johnson. We talk about the inception of digital photography and his experiences with that. Then we go into a talk on electron microscopy, using electron microscopes, where light fails us and where actual optical photography no longer works to resolve things, and why electrons have to be used beyond that. And I think this even helium ions beyond that. I mean, there's all sorts of crazy stuff for you to explore, and why you need to see things at that scale to some degree. And then there's a great discussion with Ray Maxwell on color science. He actually used to have a show on the TWIT network called Maxwell's House, which was a lot of fun. And so I brought him in for a conversation. I got tons of fun people lined up beyond that too, including the head of repair at Nikon Canada, to talk about repairing cameras and how that may have changed over the years and what the craziest cameras are that he's ever had to cross his desk for repairs and what have you. I've got in touch with the people that design cameras that are mounted on space probes. One of the guys that's an engineer on the Lori camera that was on the New Horizons space probe that recently imaged Pluto is going to be part of a conversation too, and so on and so forth. And it continues on. So,
well, we look forward to that. We also, you are still a master over at the Arcanum, and I believe one of your cohorts is out there tonight, right?
Yeah,
is that what they call them, cohorts?
Apprentices. The cohort is the collection of them, I suppose. Although apprentice and master seems way too formal for my taste. But anyhow, it's that sort of engagement that we have. And so hi to Mark and anybody else from my cohort that is watching. I know I sent the link out to you guys, and so thanks for for chiming in and for being a part of this. And I apologize because we've been rescheduled so many times for our regular weekly cohort hangout. This was supposed to be that same time frame, but I'm glad we could choose another day. So.
Me too. I'm glad you can come here tonight. And I won't ask you what I generally like to ask photographers at the end of the show. What's next? I think we just covered that. I think
you covered a lot of it. Yeah,
there's lots of stuff for next. If someone wanted to follow your Snowflake a Day for December. And I suggest that you do, because that is just fantastic and beautiful work. Where is the best place for someone to follow that process here?
Anywhere on social media. If you're on Facebook, find me. I posted on my Don Komarechka photography page, but also on Google+, where you'll find a higher resolution image of it there. I also post the high-res files to 500px and Flickr, but you'll also find them on Instagram and Twitter. So there's a lot of places for you to find me. And every one of those gets every image throughout the week, or throughout the year, really.
And we'll try and have all those links in the show notes, too, for people to go to. But Don, thank you for coming again. I know we had to reschedule, some things that have been going on with my wife. She's getting better. She went back to work today.
Oh, fantastic!
First time in over 50 days. So today was a good day for that standpoint. But we had to reschedule a few weeks ago when we thought she was going into the emergency room and in the hospital. But that turned out good. So I was glad, Don. Thank you for working with us on that schedule, and thank you for coming out tonight.
You're very welcome.
As always, it was a joy talking with you, and I learned something every time we have you on.
And I look forward to the next one.
Yeah, we do too. So, and next week we have Karen Hutton on, which
fantastic. I love Karen. She's a great person.
Multi-talented, like Don, multi-talented person, from voiceovers to photography to who knows what else. We have Karen next week. So look for next week, same time. Was that December 8th at 8:30 Eastern? We'll see you guys next week. Until then, keep it raw. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.